What happens when two legends collide? Not on screen, but in a garage at 2 in the morning. Steve McQueen, Bruce Lee, two men who never backed down from anything. One conversation, one challenge, one moment where pride almost destroyed respect. This is the story of the fight that never happened, and why that might have been the most dangerous thing about it. The fluorescent light in Steve's Brentwood garage hummed with a frequency that made everything feel slightly unreal, like the world had shifted just enough that you couldn't trust what you were seeing. Steve stood near the open hood of his Jaguar XKSS, a wrench in his right hand. He wasn't actually working on the car. He'd been holding the same wrench in the same position for 11 minutes. Bruce Lee sat on an overturned milk crate near the workbench watching him. Neither of them had spoken in 9 minutes. The silence wasn't comfortable. It was the kind of silence that precedes violence. Dense, elastic, ready to snap. Bruce's eyes hadn't left Steve for those 9 minutes. Not in challenge, exactly. More like study. The way a chess player watches an opponent's face before they make a move. Steve knew that look. He'd used it himself 100 times, on directors, on producers, on other actors trying to take his scene. It was the look of someone deciding whether you were real or just pretending. He hated being studied. "You going to work on that car?" Bruce finally said, his voice even. "Or you going to hold that wrench until sunrise?" Steve didn't answer immediately. He set the wrench down on the fender with deliberate slowness. The metal-on-metal sound echoed in the garage. "What are you still doing here?" Steve asked. "You invited me." "That was 4 hours ago." "You invited me," Bruce repeated, "and you haven't said what you wanted to say yet." Steve turned to face him fully. "You think you're faster than me." Bruce didn't move, didn't even blink. "I don't think anything. I know what I know." "That's not what I asked." "You didn't ask a question. You made a statement." Steve felt his jaw tighten. This was exactly why he'd called Bruce at 10:30 p.m. and told him to come over. This thing between them, this constant measuring, this unspoken competition, that had been building for months on the set of their film together. Bruce stood up. Not quickly, not slowly. Just stood, with the kind of economy of movement. That made even standing seem like a martial arts technique. "You want to know if I'm faster than you?" Bruce said. "That's why I'm here." Steve's hands opened and closed at his sides. "You show up at Hollywood parties talking about how actors don't know what real fighting is." "I didn't say actors. I said most actors." "You looked at me when you said it." "Did I?" The first time Steve met Bruce Lee, it was on the Paramount lot, outside Stage 12. Bruce was teaching a private class to James Coburn in one of the empty sound stages. Steve had heard about Bruce. Everyone in Hollywood had by 1969. The martial arts. Instructor who moved like water. The guy who could kick you before you even saw his leg. Move. Steve didn't believe in legends. He believed in what he could see. So he'd shown up unannounced, pushed open the soundstage door, and watched. Bruce was in the middle of demonstrating something to Coburn. A strike so fast Steve literally couldn't track it. One moment Bruce's hand was at his side. The next moment it was an inch from Coburn's throat. There was no middle, no journey, just before and after. Coburn had laughed, delighted, and maybe a little scared. Jesus, Bruce, you could kill someone with that. Bruce had lowered his hand. That's the idea. Then he'd turned and looked directly at Steve, standing in the doorway 50 feet away. Looked at him like he'd known Steve was there the entire time. "You want to learn?" Bruce had asked. Steve had walked toward them, hands in his pockets, casual. "Learn what?" "Whatever you don't know." Steve had smiled. the smile that usually made people back down. I don't learn, I do. Bruce had smiled back, but his smile didn't mean the same thing. Then do. And Steve had realized, in that moment, that he'd met someone who wouldn't be intimidated. By Steve McQueen. You remember that day, Steve said, on the sound stage. Bruce nodded once. So, you made me look like I didn't know what I was doing. You asked to spar. I showed you what sparring was. You showed off. I showed you the difference between movie fighting and real fighting. Steve stepped closer. They were maybe 2 feet apart now, close enough that Steve could see the absolute stillness in Bruce's breathing. No tension in his shoulders. No fear in his eyes. That was the thing that made Steve angrier than anything else. Bruce wasn't afraid. Everyone was supposed to be at least a little afraid of Steve McQueen. You think because you can move fast, Steve said, voice low, that makes you tough? I don't think I'm tough, Bruce replied. Tough is a word people use when they don't have skill. So you've got skill and I've got what? Reputation? Bruce tilted his head slightly, studying Steve's face like he was reading a language written. There. You have something more dangerous than skill. Yeah? What's that? Nothing to lose? The words hit Steve like a physical thing. He felt them in his chest, in the way his breath. Caught for just a second. Bruce continued, his voice quiet. A man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous kind of fighter, because he doesn't care what happens to him. He only cares about winning. Steve's hands were shaking. He didn't know if it was anger or something else. You don't know anything about me. I know you came to that soundstage because you needed to prove you were better than someone. I know you called me tonight because you can't stop thinking about that day. I know you want to fight me right now because you think winning a fight will fill whatever empty thing is inside you. Steve's right hand moved without him telling it to. Fast, heading straight for Bruce's chest. Not even a punch, really. More of a shove. Something to make Bruce stop talking, to make him stop seeing. And then Steve's hand was just stopped. Bruce had caught his wrist mid-motion. Steve hadn't even seen him move. 1 second. Bruce's hands were at his sides. The next second, Steve's hand was trapped in Bruce's grip. Not hard. Bruce wasn't squeezing. He was just holding. Like Steve's aggression was a thing. He'd simply picked out of the air. They stood like that. Steve's hand suspended between them. Bruce's face unreadable. See? Bruce said softly. Nothing to lose. Steve tried to pull his hand back. Bruce let him. Didn't hold on, didn't make a show of. Releasing him. Just opened his fingers and Steve's hand was free. Steve stepped back, breathing hard, his mind racing through a dozen scenarios. He could throw a real punch. Bruce would probably block it. Then what? They'd actually fight? Here in his garage at 2:30 in the morning? And what would that prove? That he could get hurt by someone faster than him? That he could hurt someone because his pride demanded it? Steve looked at Bruce's face and realized something that made him feel more exposed than he'd ever felt in his life. Bruce wasn't scared of him because Bruce had already decided Steve wouldn't actually hit him. Bruce had read him completely. I could take you, Steve said, but his voice had lost its edge. Maybe, Bruce said. Maybe not. Do you need to know? Steve didn't answer. A real fight isn't a movie, Bruce continued. There's no director to yell cut, no stunt, coordinator to make sure nobody gets seriously hurt. You win or lose and someone ends up with permanent damage. Maybe me, probably you, definitely the friendship we could have. Had. We're not friends. No, but we could have been. Steve turned back to face him. You think I need friends? I think, Bruce said carefully, you need someone who isn't afraid of you. And I think you. No, I'm not afraid. So now you have to decide. Do you punish me for that or respect it? Steve walked to the mini fridge in the corner of the garage, pulled out 2 bottles of Budweiser, held one out to Bruce. Bruce took it. Steve opened his and took a long drink. Bruce opened his but didn't drink, just held it. I was in reform school when I was 14, Steve said suddenly. Boys Republic in Chino. You know what you learn in a place like that? Bruce waited. You learn that the only thing that matters is not being weak. You show weakness, everyone. Comes for you, every day. So you stop showing it. You make yourself into something hard, something scary. And then one day you're out, and you're an adult, and you realize you don't know how to be anything else. He looked at Bruce. You think I have nothing to lose? You're wrong. I have everything to lose. That's why I can't afford to lose anything. Bruce took a small sip of his beer, set it down on the workbench. You know what the first principle of Jeet Kune Do is? Steve shook his head. Absorb what is useful. Discard what is not. Add what is uniquely your own. Bruce met Steve's eyes. You absorbed toughness because you needed it. But you're holding on to it. Even when it's not useful anymore. It's making you fight people who could help you. You think you can help me? Steve asked, and for the first time, it wasn't a challenge. It was a genuine question. I think, Bruce said, we can help each other. You know things about acting I'll never understand. I know things about fighting you'll never understand. Or we can stand in this. Garage and prove who's tougher, and both of us will be smaller for it. Steve finished his beer, crushed the can in his hand, threw it into the trash bin across the garage. It went in clean. So what? We're supposed to be teacher and student? We're supposed to be 2 guys who respect what the other one knows. Steve considered this. I'm not good at respect. I noticed. No. I'm not good at admitting I'm not the best at something. I noticed that too. Steve almost smiled. Almost. You're kind of an arrogant son of a bitch, you know that? You should meet this guy I know. He's worse. Bruce left just before 4 a.m. They didn't shake hands, didn't make plans, just nodded at each other, and Bruce walked to his car. Steve stood in the garage doorway and watched him drive away. The sky was starting to lighten at the edges, that pre-dawn blue that makes everything look new. He went back inside, lay down on the couch in the living room, stared at the ceiling. He'd been ready to fight. Really fight, not Hollywood fighting. The real thing. And the strangest part was, he still didn't know if he could beat Bruce Lee in an actual fight. The even stranger part was, he was pretty sure that didn't matter anymore. James Coburn's backyard. A small gathering. Actors, stunt people, a few martial artists. Someone was grilling steaks. Someone else was arguing about the end of Easy Rider. Steve showed up with Neela, saw Bruce across the yard, talking to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Bruce saw him. Their eyes met. Bruce nodded. Steve nodded back. And that was all. No conversation needed. No performance for the crowd. Just 2 men who'd been to the edge of something violent and stupid and had chosen to step back. Later, Steve found himself standing next to Bruce at the bar table, both of them refilling drinks. You get that bike running? Bruce asked casually. The one in your garage? Jaguar, Steve corrected. And yeah, runs perfect now. Good. Silence for a moment. Comfortable this time. You ever want to actually learn? Bruce said. Not movie fighting. Real fighting. You know, where to find me. Steve looked at him. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll teach you something that scares you more than any punch. Yeah? What's that? Bruce smiled. How to lose without losing yourself. Steve thought about that. Took a sip of his drink. That sounds like some fortune cookie. Bullshit. It probably is. You just make that up? Maybe. They both laughed. Not much, just enough. The story spread anyway, the way stories always do in Hollywood. Some people said Steve and Bruce had fought in Steve's garage and it ended in a draw. Some people said Bruce had knocked Steve out with one punch. Some people said Steve had refused to fight because he knew he'd lose. Some people said they became best friends. Some people said they never spoke again. The truth was simpler and more complicated. They had fought, just not with fists. And they had both lost and won. Steve never became Bruce's student. Bruce never became Steve's friend, not in the traditional sense. But something changed that night in the garage. Some edge in Steve got a little duller. Some. Part of him that needed to prove something to everyone stopped needing it quite so badly. Years later, after Bruce died in 1973, someone asked Steve at a dinner party if the story was true, if he and Bruce Lee had really fought. Steve had looked into his drink for a long time before answering. No, he finally said. We didn't fight. So it's just a Hollywood myth? Steve finished his drink. I said we didn't fight. I didn't say nothing happened. And he never explained what that meant. Disclaimer. This story is inspired by real people and Hollywood legends surrounding Steve McQueen and Bruce Lee's relationship. Conversations, internal thoughts, and specific details have been dramatized for narrative purposes. While based on documented reports of tension between the two men and their mutual respect, the exact events of any private encounter remain unknown. This is presented for educational and storytelling purposes.